Hi guys. So today, out of this book that I'm reading, I'm going to talk about the chapter that says a model of DID and the attachment theory. And the reason I want to touch bases with this is I've had a few people claim that they deal with attachment issues as well. Some I've seen have enmeshment issues. I've even had some pick on me claiming that I have coddling issues with therapy. If you have a really good therapist, they will know how to put boundaries up for that. And the idea is to teach you how to reparent yourself and how to love yourself. And that is done through the therapeutic process, psychotherapy, that consists of EMDR, CBT, DBT, EFT, and a newer one called DNMS. And if you don't know what them are, you're more than welcome to look them up. There's also the need to stimulate the brain from the left to the right hemisphere. That is done with bilateral stimulation, which can be done through EMDR, which is used with vibratable tools in the hand, or by ear sound stimulation, or by sight. We propose that disassociating individuals are those victims of childhood abuse who coped by refusing to conceive of the contents of their caregiver's mind and thus successfully avoiding having to think about their caregiver's wish to harm them. They go on to defensively disrupt their capacity to depict feelings and thoughts in themselves and in others. This leaves them to operate upon inaccurate, schematic impressions of thoughts and feelings, and they are thus immensely vulnerable in all intimate relationships. So what they're talking about here is, which is something I've dealt with, is you think you have a friend and you're willing to do anything for that friend to gain love and compassion and understanding. And let's use an example of that. Let's say that friend says, you have to be here on this date no matter what, and if you're not, you're no longer my friend. Well, people that are enmeshed or have attachment issues are going to do everything they can to please that person. And that is something that you learn from early childhood, pleasing the caregiver, okay? And so you want to change that impression and work with your therapist on finding a way to learn to self-soothe, love yourself, and not attach to these people that you think may be caring about you or loving you or whatever. Information, whether incoming, stored, or outgoing, is not integrated in a normal way. The individual is aware of the presence of the stimulus, but is not able to be aware of that awareness. The deactivation of mentalization is a defense available to the abused child or any individual suffering from trauma, where the aim is the reduction of the psych experience of pain, terror, or other overwhelming negative effects. Attachment theory suggests that it is precisely such emotional states that call forth the need for the caregiver. If the child learns in infancy that the caregiver is unable to provide the reflective containment necessary to regulate such states, and if, consequently, the child only acquires this metacognitive aspect of self-soothing to a limited extent, the likelihood of the resorting to this dramatic but in short-term adaptive defense is increased. Okay, so how do I put this? Let's categorize this into, let's say, 3 different states, okay? And I'm going to touch bases on that next, and I'm also going to show you some medical information of my own so that you understand how intense and how far this can go and why it is so important to learn the aspects of DID and the definitions of it through the research, because lots of misinformation out there. So let's get into that next. So let's talk about specific symptoms. We're going to cut a little bit of the chapter here and just kind of give number 1, which is switching from one state of consciousness to another, which is something that is slightly noticeable but very covert, okay? Which is occupied by facial, postural, motor, speech, affective, and cognitive changes in dissociative identity disorder. And why do I bring this up? Well, as you can see here, these are my pre-K assessments. And as you can see, there was trouble with motor skills, whatnot. I also had family members that would say, as a child, if something was not right with me, I would stare off for hours, or I would pace and mumble to myself. These were signs of a distressed child that nobody picked up on in the 80s. So, number 2. The incomplete structuralization of the self enables dissociative patients to disavow ownership of both their bodies and their actions upon them. This is of great importance in all patients who control their thinking by harming themselves, since the pain and discomfort is probably only bearable because of the pathological separation of the psychological self representation from the representation of the physical state. So this is something a lot of people don't talk about. Self-harm and harm to oneself in DID is very common. You will see a lot of people not talk about that issue. They also won't talk about the fact that switching doesn't just happen because there's something, cool and enlightening, or a specific stuffy setting out or something. Usually a switch to an alternative state of your mind takes place when a person is severely triggered with past memories, or an example, I had therapy today, and it was quite interesting to find out that I had lost time yet again. A lot of times, family members, my husband, children will see that I rock back and forth trying to ground myself to stay when I am nervous. Sometimes this doesn't work and I end up having a switch anyway. This is something that a lot of people on TikTok do not discuss. So it is something that is done because I am scared, or I am in pain, or I am dealing with a severe past memory, and sometimes getting through the memories can be very difficult. The severe abuse from little on taught me how to disassociate as a child, and that was because a lot of times when abuse was happening, it could be very painful. A prime example of that is one man had his hands covered in cement and decided during the time he was helping build our house in 1988, he would have a little fun time, okay? Cement is very painful when left on you and dried. Can you imagine what that feels like down there? Yeah, that's what I thought. So, let's get into the next chapter. Part 3, okay? However, if the maltreated child has no social support of sufficient strength and intensity to enable an attachment bond to develop, which could provide the context for the acquisition of a reliable capacity to envisage the psychological state of the other in intense interpersonal relationships, then the experience of abuse will not be reflected on or resolved. Okay? Naturally, the unresolved experience of abuse diminishes the likelihood of meaningful relationships, which, in a self-perpetrating way, further reduces the likelihood of a satisfactory resolution of the disturbing experience. Okay? In fact, a pattern may be established whereby suspicion and distrust become generalized and lead to a turning away from the mental state of most significant objects and in apparent decoupling of the mentalizing model, leaving the person bereft of human contact. This may account for the neediness of these individuals, yet no sooner do they become involved with another than the malfunctioning of their inhabited mentalizing capacity leads them into terrifying interpersonal confusion and chaos. They become terrorized by their own thoughts about their experience via projection in the other, particularly their aggressive impulses and fantasies. They become crippled, and most commonly they reject or arrange to be rejected by their object. Psychoanalysis or psychotherapy can break the vicious cycle of this by reinforcing reflective capacity. Now, my experience with this. So what they're saying here is, as a child, normal development Children need attachment, they need love, they need care, they need that triangle, specific needs on the bottom, then up that, and then you need coddling, care, all that. When a child doesn't have those needs met, they become disassociative, detached, and then they want to attach to somebody. So an example for me, as a child, I would attach to things, lots of things. One was my grandmother, who had died when I was about 5 or 6 years old. Okay. When she had died, that attachment was taken away. I would attach to animals, dogs, kittens, frogs, whatever. That was taken away. There were specific people in my family who would just, how do I put this, slowly kill my cats or my dogs, or even the frogs that I get attached to. My grandfather wanted them for fishing. So there'd be these times where I taught myself at a little age, do not attach, do not love, do not care. And it became a issue so much that my mind decompartmentalized, okay? Making an issue for me to self-soothe, to be able to take care of myself. So my brain created alternative states of the mind to care and love myself. So in a way, it was a good coping mechanism at this time. DID wasn't really there. It becomes DID when it no longer is useful and it is causing a disruption in your life. So for children to display DID symptoms, it's very, very rare because it is a coping mechanism at that time. Hope that makes sense. Evading the mental world rarely acquires adequate meta-control over the representational world of internal working models. Unhelpful models of relationship patterns emerge frequently, and the internal world of the child and adult comes to be dominated by multiple voices. So here they're talking about when it becomes DID, it becomes complicated, it's not working, things like that. Okay. The individual's enhanced suspiciousness of human motives reinforces his or her strategy to forego mentalizing, thus further distorting the normal development of a reflective function. Caught in a vicious cycle of paranoid anxiety and exaggerated defensive maneuvers, the individual becomes inextricably entangled into an internal world dominated by multiple and often dangerous, evil, and above all, mindless working models of relationships. So they're talking about abuse, even as an adult. Because of your childhood, you can be in the wrong relationships, leading to drugs, alcohol, physical abuse, things like that. Psychotherapeutic treatment in general compels the patient's mind to focus on the mental state of the benevolent other, that of the therapist. Okay? The frequent and consistent labeling, elaborating, and interpretation of the mental state of both therapist and patient are then essential. If the inhibition on this aspect of mental function is to be lifted over a prolonged time period, diverse interpretations concerning the patient's perceptions of their psychosociological environment includes the therapeutic relationship. This would enable them to attempt to create a mental representation both of themselves and of others as thinking and feeling. Okay? This could then form the core of the sense of self, which gives the capacity to represent ideas and meanings and create the basis for the bond that ultimately permits independent, coherent, and unity existence. So they're not talking about coddling here. They're talking about working with each other for years. I am now into therapy for almost 10 years with the same therapist, and I respect her. I care about her deeply, but yet I also have boundaries and know that eventually I'm going to have to take care of myself. Yeah, shocker, huh? And that's what they teach you. They teach you to be able to put up boundaries and be able to state points clearly and vocally, and that is what I'm doing, okay? Now, keep in mind, many techniques can be used to help these issues. And another thing I want to show you is in this book, there is references. So here's the references if you decide you want to say, well, where is she getting that from? Here's more references, okay? And here's more references, okay? So that is that chapter. And I think it was a very good chapter, and it made a lot of sense. Now, my final thought. Please don't be afraid to bring this up in your mental health therapy. Also, be careful online. There are people that are going to misjudge you and pick at you just because they have nothing else better to do. The problem with DID that a lot of people don't understand is that we already have amnesia with a lot of things. And names, numbers, and sayings, and even things, imagery can be confusing to us to try to figure out things. And that is something that is also not talked about in DID. Anyway, that's all I have today, and I hope to get into some more later down the line. And now I have to go. My time's run out. So always consult your mental health care provider, and you're more than welcome to use these videos in your therapeutic process. And that's all I have today. Loves. Bye.